Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are so proud and happy to have our friend Frank Luntz here to do another one of his dynamic town halls. Those of you who were with us last year will remember that was the first time we started with a town hall, and it was such a success that we knew we wanted to bring it back. So Frank and I were talking about a month ago about what we should focus on, and he made a very urgent case that one of the most important issues for us to talk about as a society is the role of technology and how technology in our lives is affecting not just ourselves, but our society, our ability to talk to one another. And so that's what the subject of this town hall is about. And as Frank will tell you, this is going to be interactive. I'll turn it over to you, Frank.
Thank you. Hey. Why don't you guys come on? So this is going to be different than any other Milken panel because this is going to involve you. Every year that I do this, it becomes more and more of a challenge as my body becomes bigger and larger, it becomes more and more difficult to work my way through the aisle. So, such is life. I'm going to be asking you some questions, and the first thing I want to know is how many of you believe that you can get through the next hour and not look at your phone? Raise your hands if you have the capability of doing that. So you're telling me that you can't do that. Really? What's your name, and does your family know this? So that is going to be my challenge to you all, because that's one of the problems. One of the most significant problems is that we now have no attention span. And we have no ability to take in information that is complicated, that is involved, simply because we don't have the ability to pay attention. One more question for you. How many of you think that technology and the web and social media have a positive impact on American politics? Okay, don't all raise your hands at once. Just for the record, because I don't know if the camera's got it, not a single person in this room raised their hands. We are seriously in trouble. So to begin this conversation, Gabe, I'm going to start with you.
Yep.
You've got a background in Google, in Twitter, now Niantic. They don't have the ability to pay attention. They don't think that technology and social media is a positive impact on politics. What the hell happened?
That's a small question to start with. So here's what I think happened is I think it all started potentially innocently with a bunch of folks building some extraordinary things. But along the way, and I absolutely, looking back, can reflect on this in Twitter's case, along the way, I think we lost sight of, are we building something just to build something? Or do we have a clear understanding of its thesis? What is this thing that we're building here to do? And the challenge is, as companies have started to build technology without that understanding, or without conviction about what they're dedicating it to, it becomes a question of, hey, what if we just built this and see what happens? And I think that we're all today experiencing the perils of that, of seeing like when you do not have a clearly defined thesis, the way people can fill in those blanks can be very perilous. And so that is, I think, in part of how it is that we've gotten here today.
So I want to turn it over to the audience for a second. I'm going to start here, and you're going to send it all the way down to the end. I want you all, this back row, to give me a word or phrase. When you hear the word technology, what word or phrase comes to mind? And please speak into the microphone.
Liberating.
Leverage.
Misconstrued.
Social media.
Information technology. Privacy.
Productivity.
Privacy because it offers it or doesn't provide it?
No privacy.
And does that bother you?
In some way it does, yeah.
So what are you nervous that the world will find out about because it offers no privacy? No. So you heard the comments. They weren't that bad. We know that the public is anxious and nervous. This may not represent America here, but in the work that you've done, and you were part of the governance of the web and the decision-making and how it would operate. When you hear those comments, what's your reaction to them?
Most people don't know what technology is doing to their lives. They think they do, but there are layers and layers beneath what we experience. Today we saw the book out there about the surveillance capitalism. There are all kinds of things happening to us and made out of our use of technology. Having said that, technology does have many productive uses. The question is not if technology is good or technology is bad. We could make that same argument about cars, about knives, about weapons, about a million things. The question is, how are we as a society going to use this technology? And who will set the ground rules? Today, we are clear that companies that control much of the technology in the world have failed to self-govern. Very little self-governance is working. On the other hand, letting governments control all of that, first, is impossible because technology is largely transnational, not national, or even international, and therefore the ability of governments to manage technology is very small. And secondly, I'm not sure how many of us want to trust them right now to step in and govern that. That's what we're facing today.
So before I let you go, then how do we make that decision? If somebody has to have the ultimate responsibility for how things operate based on your decades of work, if you had to trust one person or one organization, who would you trust?
None. That's the answer. The real answer is, how do we create a highly distributed polycentric governance model that does not have a center of control? Because that's what caused the problem in the first place. So is there a point of reference, you're asking maybe, to set up red lines, to set up guardrails? I think we're all missing that, and I think it's needed. Having said this, the rules, the norms, how governance should evolve in the future cannot be reliant on either governments or businesses. It needs to rely on the troika of governments, businesses, and the citizenry. And that's the future. That's where we need to go.
So Tristan, before I pull you into this, we're going to send this down this direction. When you hear the word technology, what company comes to mind first? You can only choose one. Which one do you think of first? And if you can pass it down.
Google.
Apple.
Google.
Apple.
Apple. Quicken Loans.
Apple. Google.
Will the Quicken Loans person please leave? So let's do it this way. You can pick any company. I'm going to say it out loud. I want you guys to applaud if that's the company you would have chosen. Who would have chosen Apple? Applaud. Who would have chosen Google? Facebook. Amazon. Netflix. Quicken Loans. Are you guys sponsors of the conference? Okay, then I'm sorry. You are at the center. So you know how this got going. I was asked to have a meeting with Tristan, and those of you who know me know that I tend not to do things like this. If I'm told to do it, I won't do it. And it was probably the most productive meeting that I've had in 2019. You are right there at the center of technology, incivility, disrespect, the rise of political populism, which I will acknowledge is a wonderful way to win an election and a horrible way to govern. And we see this happening throughout Europe. We're not the only ones here who are having political problems from this. But it has gotten so ugly and so impossible. Is it only going to get worse?
It will get worse if we don't radically change what we're doing. So for those of you who don't know, I was a design ethicist at Google, so I was studying how do you ethically influence 2 billion people's thoughts, how do you shape the attention economy, the sort of big loaf of bread that is 2 billion people's attention, when you're making choices about how screens work, whether it's news feeds or notifications or the way that apps hack into your psychology. And I think that people don't even yet recognize where we are or what the issue is. Right now, if you ask people, and you're already asking, like, what is even the issue with technology? It's a cacophony of grievances and scandals. No one even has a problem statement that we know what we're solving. But one of the things that's invisibly happened is, I would argue, and this is a bold claim, that technology is holding the pen of history right now. So let me give you an example why. So how many of you had the experience where you're talking to someone about something in your kitchen or with your friend, and then you open up like Facebook or something, and there's an ad for the very thing you were just talking about? How many people have had that experience? And you think that how many people, keep your hand up if you think that they're listening on the microphone to you? So there's a good, what percentage of the audience is that? 30%? Something like that. So you think they're listening on the microphone. But what I'm here to tell you is, for technology to gain control over humanity, it doesn't have to hack human strengths. We're all looking out for, when does technology get stronger than human strengths? It replaces our jobs. It's smarter than us. It starts taking our jobs. It starts doing things for us. What I'm going to argue is that just by hacking our weaknesses, it can take control. So how does it know without listening? So I know for a fact that data forensics show, and the Facebook VP of Advertising promises, that they do not listen to the microphone. How is it that they're still able to know the conversation you had? It's because inside of a Google server or a Facebook server is a little voodoo doll avatar-like version of you, like a model of you. And I don't have to listen to your conversations because I've accumulated all the clicks and the nail filings and hair clippings, all the clicks and likes you've ever made, and it makes this voodoo doll act more and more like you. And so all I have to do is simulate what conversations the voodoo doll is having, and I know the conversation you just had without having to listen to the microphone. So the point is, prediction has already overtaken the human species. Another second example of this, really quick, is YouTube. So how many of you're about to watch a YouTube video, you're about to hit play, and you're going to think, I'm going to watch this one YouTube video, and then I'm out. Yeah, you're all laughing because you hit play, and then we wake up from a trance 2 hours later, and you're like, what the hell just happened to me? And it's because in that same moment when you hit play, it wakes up an avatar voodoo doll-like version of you. It has one of these for 1 out of 4 people on Earth. Okay? And it knows exactly what video to play next because it's like it simulates on that voodoo doll, if I tested these 100 million possible variations of videos, which one would cause you to stay the longest? Such that now 70% of YouTube's traffic is driven by the algorithm, meaning what YouTube is choosing, not what you're choosing. So 70% and people spend 60 minutes a day on average of YouTube. That's 1 billion hours a day, so 700 million hours a day is determined by a computer. So we're jacked in. You have Facebook is about the size of Christianity in terms of influence. YouTube is about the size of Islam in terms of just size, 2.3 billion users, 2 billion users. And you have 60 minutes a day. 70% of that is determined by a computer that's simulating what will work on the voodoo doll. Okay? And what we know is that YouTube systematically tilts the playing field towards the crazy stuff, conspiracy theories, and it's taking control of what people are thinking and believing.
So I'm going to pull up slide 3 of someone who handles that kind of stuff. I want you to take a look at this. And please pull up slide 3 and not me. That is an example. My favorite word in the English language is buffet. Now you understand why. I know that social media does more to waste time instead of using it. That's not what I'm concerned about. It's the second one. It's 61%. That it does more to spread unfair attacks against public figures instead of holding them accountable. And I am frankly scared to death, and this is why I wanted to moderate this panel specifically. I'm involved in politics, or I have been. And I was involved in some campaigns in the 1990s that I do not look back on fondly today. But I will tell you that I never could have imagined how bad it would have gotten. And I want to hear from you because I want the public to hear from you. This is being streamed live. So essentially, and I'm waiting to see someone on their phone so I can out you in front of like all of America. So go ahead, I'm looking for it. What are we going to do to teach people not to tear each other apart? What are we going to do to add a sense of respect and decency and civility? And how are we going to put civics back into our government, into our schools, into our daily lives? Anybody here want to offer either a problem or a solution for how to deal with social media so that it isn't the poison, it doesn't have the toxicity? And Gabe, I'm going to go to you after I can get a couple of comments here. What are you going to do?
You have to teach the kids about kindness on the web and not just all the negativity.
Just for the record, it's a Quicken Loans person who's running out right now because she's coughing. That's God's way of saying Quicken Loans is not technology, just so you know. I agree with that. Somebody else? Yes.
I think it starts with the children and making them feel heard and validated, because it seems to me that a lot of adults they're the worst trolls on the internet. And I think it's because they're people that haven't had a voice, and all of a sudden I can relatively anonymously, say anything and people are going to pay attention to me. And perhaps that was something that they've never experienced before, and they're taking it in a negative direction instead of a positive.
So if I can add to that, why are our kids bullying people so much more now? Why is the coarseness of the language? For that very point. Kids are taking the lessons from their parents, and they're now acting it out themselves, which makes it even more horrific.
I'm thinking about it from a different angle. My wife and I just got back from a trip to Japan, and we were impressed that Japan's society and culture are really based upon kindness, consideration, and respect for other people. It's an incredibly polite, kind, thoughtful society. What impact is technology having on Japanese society? Does anybody have any idea?
Anyone want to take that?
It's a great question. I don't know. I will say on the cyberbullying thing, your nervous system automatically makes you feel the emotions of someone else. So if you're a kid and you say it to someone else, the balance sheet of your nervous system automatically feels the balance sheet you just created in emotional space in someone else. So when you cut that loop and you say something to someone and you don't actually see how it affects them, and you reinforce it so 100 people saw me do that to them and they cheer me on even though I didn't actually want to do it, you're creating social reinforcement on bullying to a scale that's unprecedented, and that's what's going on.
So I know that you're an ethicist, and you're sometimes uncomfortable with me using that language, but it's one of the reasons. And by the way, my very first class that I ever taught 30 years ago, Gabe was my student. And you have no idea how proud it makes me feel that I'm now up on stage with him together as colleagues. This is like education at its best. And just so you know, these are the most awful people because they don't applaud at shit. Nothing. That was the Jeb Bush approach to try to get a reaction out of them. So as someone who's seen this up close at 3 different companies, instead of complaining about it, what are we going to do about it?
So, Tristan, I think you're 100% right. And actually, if I can just go back to having a thesis for what you build and contrast that with the Twitter experience, because think about it, in those days of Twitter, the mentality was sort of like, hey, this technology, we put it out there, it's facilitating these incredible uprisings and revolutions and empowering people and giving them voice.
By the way, I'm going to just hold for 1 second. My own student right here from NYU Abu Dhabi is the first one who broke the commitment not to be on their phone. So if the camera crew, because I know this is being broadcast in New Zealand right now, James Pierce from New Zealand, there you go. So I guess I'm an awful professor, but continue.
Actually, Tristan, this is the one point that defies your earlier one, where it's actually bullying that can happen in real life.
Yeah,
but in any case,
no, it's true.
True. But just back to the technology as a tool that could be used for uprising and facilitating expression. At the same time, looking back in hindsight, this behavior, and again, in the context of a product that had an ill-defined thesis, you'd have this experience, particularly for new users, where new users would go on Twitter, attempt to express themselves in a typically civil way, and were met with crickets. And yet users who started to express themselves in increasingly hyperbolic ways and divisive ways were the ones that got the most attention. And this negative trend was already in place. And I think in hindsight, we have this Pollyannish concept of like, it will work itself out. And of course, we now know how this goes. In contrast, so today I work for a company called Niantic. It was created by the original creators of Google Earth, which was originally conceived as a video game. Niantic is today responsible for Pokemon Go. And these other games which require that the users go outside in the actual world and interact with actual human beings in order to play it. But my point about the thesis is this company has a very clear understanding, which is every product needs to promote a sense of exploration, exercise, and real-world social interaction. And everything that comes along that is outside of that thesis is not something to be pursued. And so, on one hand, I think part of the problem that we're facing today is an absence of thesis. And then on the other hand, I think that there is an existing thesis which is just simply wrong that's leading us in this terrible direction. And I think we need to have, as you're describing, this potentially like troika response in order to get to a better place of balance.
So I want a show of hands. How many of you have a Twitter account? Okay, now whether or not you've raised your hands, is Twitter has a positive impact or negative impact on society? Raise your hands if you think it's positive. And now hands up if you think it's negative. Okay, so it's a lot more negative. So what do? Do we blame the technology or do we blame the user? And going forward, how do we try? Because I am of the belief that Twitter's very much the problem, not the solution. What do we do?
Well, I mean, in terms of it being a user solution versus the technology, so I want to give this point on being true to your mission. So Facebook in February 2017 changed its mission statement. If you remember what it used to be, to make the world open and connected, to changing it to bring the world closer together. And when he said that, when Zuckerberg said this, he said our new goal is to bring people closer together. So what are we going to do that? We're going to help people join Facebook groups, because Facebook groups are communities where people meet each other, of course, only through the internet, and we're going to help that happen. So what are we going to do? We're going to build an AI. So they're mission-driven is the point here. They're being super mission-driven. They're going to say, how do we recommend the perfect groups for people to join so they join more groups? There's a quote Zuckerberg said, it worked. We built this AI. It got people to join 50% more Facebook groups. So I'll give you an example. It goes wrong. You're a new mom. You join a Facebook group for moms to trade advice. Baby advice, kids advice, family health, etc. Super useful use of Facebook. But then now Facebook comes along and it wants to recommend groups for you to join. And how does it choose what to recommend? It says, what's the most engaging group for a voodoo doll who joins this mom's group? So what are other voodoo dolls who join mom's groups like to join that keeps them engaged a lot? What was one of the top recommendations? Anti-vaccine conspiracy theory Facebook groups. If you join one anti-vaccine conspiracy theory Facebook group, after that, now case is calculating voodoo doll who joins anti-vax, what tends to keep people like that really engaged? And right after that was Pizzagate, Flat Earth, the whole conspiracy theory matrix. It's called a conspiracy correlation matrix by my friend Renee DiResta, who wrote the Senate Intelligence Committee report on the Russia investigation. So we have a system that even when the company is trying to operate on its mission, and it's trying to be mission aligned and do good, the blind spot of using technology without being sophisticated about human nature and what it's going to do to the social fabric is still fundamentally wrong. And I think with Twitter, what we have to recognize is that in a world that is more complicated and nuanced than ever, there is no black and white answers. And Twitter does not allow for complexity. It forces simplicity and short things to say. When you can only say short things, the way to get attention is to say short, outrageous things. To build on Gabe's point, for every word of moral outrage that you use in a tweet, it increases your retweet rate by 17%. So just say, it's abominable, it's a disgrace, it's awful. You use words like that, and you get reinforced, and Twitter puts you at the top of the newsfeed. And there's only so much attention in the attention economy, so it starts to fill up a greater and greater percentage of your Twitter feed, and so you get the entire thing rewarding outrage and craziness. And in a world that's complicated and nuanced, this is what's driving and at least increasingly amplifying polarization around the world, because you can hire 1,000 content moderators in English to try and catch these problems, right? Say, take down all this outrageous stuff, let's shadow ban it. But how many people at Twitter speak the 22 languages of India, where there's an election coming up next month?
So
How many people they hired there?
So I will tell you that in the work that we are doing now, and if you can pull up slide number 4, in the political work that we are doing now, the damage that Twitter has done to the political system, the damage that it does every single day, we obviously have politicians that use it much more than others. It is the single greatest contributor to the toxicity of American politics of any attribute, because it gets magnified, it gets repeated, it gets sent around the world. And the problem is that politicians are now, if you look at the bottom, only 26% think that social media, the increasing use of social media, has got a positive impact on American politics. Twice as many, 49, thinks that it is actually hurting American democracy. So anyone here want to talk about Twitter? Because this is the core of what I call social climate change, cultural climate change. The idea that it is just as dangerous, just as poisonous to have all this negativity and viciousness in our American political process as it is for the weather out there. And it's got the same aspect. You don't notice it until it's too late. You don't try to do anything until people have gone overboard.
This is my very big naivete when it comes to Twitter, but Twitter is, you can be fake, you can be pretend, you can be a bot, you don't have to put your real name, your phone number, they don't associate you with a person, you can troll easily. Is there a way to bring, at least for Twitter, Facebook, you're kind of in the light, is there a way to bring Twitter users to the light so that you get shamed and that so they know that Joe sitting next to you at work, this person's a bigot, this person's is a racist or something? Is that way faced with a name?
I think you're touching on something quite important, that we need to ask ourselves. I think we all know the problem, so enough hashing the problem. Let's move to how do we solve this? And I think you just put your finger on one potential solution, and that is to get all of us to take some responsibility for changing the system. Now, some things we can't do because those companies that are trading on our data are extremely powerful right now. They have zero incentive to stop taking our data and selling it and peddling it. None. Apple has at least some hardware to sell, but those companies have nothing else. It's our data. Now, we have a role. The employees have a role. Who stopped Google recently from selling some of their technology to the government? The employees. How about we start at the engineering schools and the science schools? We put doctors through a Hippocratic oath. How about our engineers starting with an oath to do no harm?
You agree?
How about they start doing this, right? And then all of us as users, we should all vote with our dollars. When we actually continue to invest in these companies, continue to make money off of these companies, we're all complicit.
Just to add on your point, I knew a board member at Uber who had said that, for your point about internal advocacy from the workers themselves, you guys remember when the DeleteUber campaign happened? How many people remember that? So the DeleteUber campaign was basically in results of the Susan Fowler stuff against Travis, the CEO, and there was this huge uprising among users saying delete Uber. But the DeleteUber campaign didn't actually cause people to delete the app. People didn't delete the app. But what it did do is it changed the culture. So now if you worked at Uber and you're having a drink in the Mission District of San Francisco and you lean over to your friend and say, I work at Uber, people said, oh, like, really? And so that is the kind of culture that we need to change. Now, not naive techlash, not kind of like, let's just get angry at tech companies naively. We need to change, we have to identify the problem. The thing, the elephant in the room is when the business model is capturing your attention, where the stock price is directly tied to how many minutes can I mine from your brain? How many user accounts can I tell Wall Street? When, last year or 2 years ago, 17% of Twitter's users were bots. They were fake accounts. And a bunch of them were the Russian bots, and they couldn't take them down because their stock price was directly tied to how many users they've been telling Wall Street. And when they actually did last year shut down 70 million accounts, they got punished by Wall Street instead of getting rewarded by Wall Street. So we're in a situation where there's a double bind where the very thing that's propping up the revenue, per your point about the data, they can't escape this business model, is the fundamental coupling that we have to undo.
Yeah, Frank, I just need to say this because everything we can do, and the youth and the employees and the citizens can do, will not quench the thirst of those companies for data. They need data to survive. They need data to sell ads.
But
So there has to be something else.
I want to get away from data, because I know that the previous panel talked about that. I'm talking about content. I'm talking about what turns people against each other, so that we do not trust anyone anymore, that we do not even listen to anyone. There were a couple people who were supposed to be on this panel, but they refused to be on the panel because they did not like one of the participants, because that individual had worked for Niantic and Google. And I think that, quite frankly, to be explicit, is pathetic. At the Milken Institute, at the global conference, if you won't participate with someone simply because you disagree with them, that you want to have a hearing without any kind of challenge, I'm grateful that the Milken Institute won't allow that to happen. And so those of you who saw, you'll notice that there are two people who are not on this panel. I won't name them, but you can figure out who they are because they just spoke to you moments ago. What about content and how ugly it has become?
Well, I would want to go back to, Tristan, what you were saying earlier about sort of this alignment between mission and reality, because I think part of the challenge, Frank, is that there is a reasonable expectation that a consumer can have of what experience they can expect on a certain platform, and I think that there is an untruth in advertising that goes on between what some companies say that they're there to do versus what they're actually there to do. You know, and I don't want to lose your thread on content, but this example of DeleteUber is a really profound one. And back to solutions, the beauty of whether it is the activism inside of these companies or the specific DeleteUber example is there is a level of specificity that's involved in the feedback. It's not just saying, technology company, you are bad. It is, and my recollection of DeleteUber was slightly different, which is, my recollection was there was the travel ban, during which time taxis had a strike in New York City, during which time Uber had surge pricing coinciding with the absence of taxis, which further compounded DeleteUber. And basically, what people were saying is, technology company, when you are being opportunistic about an issue of great social and political importance, I will not stand for that. It is a very, very specific bit of feedback that is giving technology companies feedback on, here's our expectation of your product, and here's our very specific expectation of your values. And so to me, that feedback loop, the beauty of this is we now have some sort of forum or precedent or channels for this type of communication, which is great. And I think it's empowering consumers to do this. It's unclear to me at large how companies are going to respond, but there are some early positive signs there.
Frank, I'll answer a little bit on content. I do believe, thinking solutions here, that there has to be a top-down solution and a bottom-up solution. The bottom-up solution is relatively simpler. We need new golden rules taught to kids about how to behave in the digital world. We don't have these. We give them golden rules about beating each other in classes and being kind to each other, but we don't explain to them how this translates on their phones. So we need to do that in schools. From the top-down side, some of you may remember in the 50s, Pugwash. Pugwash was a city in Canada where scientists who created the nuclear bomb got together, led by Einstein, to think about what this will do to the world. We need a pugwash for the social digital media age. We need people in this world to come together and start speaking about civility in the digital world. And how do we, and if you speak today to Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the web, or Vint Cerf, who invented the internet and TCP/IP, and Bob Kahn, they would tell you this has gone wrong.
So what I'd like to
Let's get these people back in the room to create their own pugwash.
So we have a chance to do, we got an election coming up. They're going to be voting in Iowa and New Hampshire in less than a year. I'd love to see a candidate for president make an announcement that they will never use social media for negativity. For Twitter, for Facebook, that it'll only be to talk about why their ideas, their solutions, and that it will commit not to be negative and not to tear each other apart? Yes or no?
I love that idea.
Okay, you're up back there.
Okay, so I was excited that we seem to be getting to a solution space, and I would love for us to get there a little bit more quickly. There was a prior comment that was made that was something along the lines of, hey, if we knew that there were no anonymous people, if people had faces and they had names, and they knew that there was some degree of accountability or at least sort of public recognition of who you are, perhaps that would tone down the dialogue, make people more accountable. In my second job, I work, if you want to call it that, as an elected official for a small town in Maryland. Well, a not so small town in Maryland, but it's not my full-time gig. There's a product called Nextdoor, in which everybody has an identity, and those identities are verified through some mechanism. And yet, the dialogue is as time-suckingly depressing and needlessly personal as it would be even if these people were anonymous. We know who these people are. We know what neighborhood they live in. We know what their face looks like. And yet, it's just like the Washington Post comment section. So I guess I'm a little bit discouraged by that as a potential silver bullet. It seems that, people, I think we need to disconnect people's dopaminergic receptor sites in their brains from their fingertips on their keyboards to be able to help to solve this, because I don't think that public identification is going to do it.
I can jump in really quick on this one. Okay. Yep.
So just a quick one. You mentioned shadow banning, and I'm just wondering what's the tech industry doing in terms of the governance of decision making around that, and integrating, some of the fundamental concepts of our democracy, of free speech, and that the remedy for bad speech is more speech, good speech, and that really restrictions on freedom of speech should be quite minimal and tied to yelling fire in a crowded movie theater, that sort of thing. I'm just curious, because if the direction is going towards some sort of decentralized governance mechanism to try to control it, how is that being done? How is that being thought through, and what limitations or constraints will be put on that?
Yeah. So on the speech issue, it's really tricky. We have this line that freedom of speech is not the same thing as freedom of reach. So what I mean by that is when we get obsessed with speech, the thing that we really ought to be concerned. So attention is the finite resource. We used to think that information was the competitive resource. Who has more information? But now we have infinite information. We have abundant access to information. So that's not the cognitive, that's not where you get that advantage. What really matters now is attention is the thing that all information has to get shrunk down to fit into. And so the issue with the things that tech companies are trying to solve with shadow banning is right now, if I told you, Alex Jones of InfoWars got recommended 15 billion times by YouTube. 15 billion times. So when, and the same thing is true with this outrage magnifier, right? So if you get more amplitude from just adding moral outrage to your tweets, that starts to take up more and more of the airwaves. So what we have to deal with, and this is unprecedented territory. I'm not saying this is easy, there's an answer, like, oh, it's so easy, we just shadow ban these guys. I'm saying this is a new era where we need to rewrite. Free speech is actually an inadequate framing of the problem in a world where there's finite attention. And there's a great paper I'd point you to called Is the First Amendment Obsolete?, written by Tim Wu, who's a professor at Columbia, that explores some of the good questions in there. To the other gentleman's point, I just wanted to add, we're trying to start a movement that is for humane technology that actually asks, what are the things that bring out the best in human nature? And what are the incentives, what are the policies, and what are the examples of the things that do that? So 2 examples of things that are better out at bringing out civility. There's a Reddit channel called Change My View. Change My View starts with an invitation that says, I believe X, and I'm inviting you, the whole world, to change my mind. And then you get points the more people's minds you've changed. So you get a higher and higher rank on the website the more you've changed people's minds. And it's worked really well that they've spun it out into a company called Change a View. So now there's a new company. There's another project called Living Room Conversations that actually says, hey, when are people the most civil and decent? And it's in groups of 6 people with good facilitation on a shared passion of shared interest, and people having good conversations on a Zoom call with 6 people, and also over dinner tables. But I think we have to find answers in our social instincts, saying where are we naturally brilliant and good, at being civil, open-minded, face-to-face contact. How do we make technology steer us to those spaces? Because as you said, even when you have authorized, verified identity in Nextdoor, people can still be kind of slimy to each other.
I don't want to lose this thread about education. You know, Niantic works very closely with the Knight Foundation on how to use technology to promote civic engagement. Your point about education is a great one. It used to be the case that this country had a much, much deeper dedication to teaching civics in school to younger people. And one could imagine a world in which civics, in a more traditional sense, that we were deliberate about this, and it included how do we engage or not? How do we understand or not the technology that's around us? And that would better equip us to deal with our current situation. Because listen, Tristan, I 100% agree with you about the fact that pseudonym or anonymity has no impact, and Nextdoor is a fine example of this. Listen, we have a president of this country who operates on a daily basis without a pseudonym and engages in real life with real people. And I think what we could all agree is in a significantly less than civil and civilized way. That is the real life lesson that our young people are being taught, and is going to take a significant counterbalance of that. I think a start of this could be in education in order to undo that for future generations.
Okay. No, I just wanted to comment on the content side. I grew up in the Deep South, and being a very obviously African-American young man, I found that in this day and age, the thoughts that people have now, they feel more comfortable expressing online in a way that I find actually be refreshing. Because it's not that they weren't having those racist, bigoted thoughts, it's just that they were afraid to express them, particularly in the politically correct world in which I was raised. And so I think there's something around confronting people for why they think the way that they do. Why do they find it so easy to support the trolls online and look at them as their champions, like, in this case, President Trump, as opposed to using social media and debating if social media itself is inherently bad? What is it that we have in ourselves in society that makes us so readily accepting of these negative thoughts?
Yeah. Can I just say super quickly in response to this? I think what you're saying and what Tristan is saying earlier coexist. And that's to say, I think it is possible that sunshine can be the best disinfectant, that having that type of less than civil behavior and speech happening out in the world, visible to all, that there's something that can be constructive about that. The problem is, and this is what Tristan was referring to earlier, when that behavior is getting positively reinforced for those people, they're going to come away with the exact opposite conclusion. It's not the case that they're out there communicating their racist ways and having a world of people. The message that they're not getting, the message they're getting is not, okay, I need to stop and check myself here. The message they're getting is the exact opposite, which is you have a community here, and that is a fundamentally problematic construct from the way that a lot of these social platforms operate. That's all I would say. Tristan, is that totally, a fair?
Yeah. That's what's driving call-out culture.
So another angle on this content problem that I don't think has come up explicitly yet is the notion of bubbleization. Effectively, social media, long-tail media, et cetera, allowing people to, power charge confirmation bias, right? To the point where it seems as if a decent chunk of society is living in almost a separate reality from many of the rest of us. Interested to know what your thoughts are as it relates to that problem. It's interrelated, but at least somewhat different. And how would you all address it?
It's an incredibly hard problem. This is my worry. One way to think about this first is when you recognize that we've taken society through the washing machine of Twitter, and out 2 years later has come a society that has been artificially polarized. If we had not had this washing machine, we wouldn't feel like the material atoms that are right outside these chairs, the bits of the world, are not different. We've gone through a psychological transformation. When I was a kid, I was a magician, so I really think about all of this in terms of how minds get manipulated. And almost like a hypnotist, I want to encourage the whole world to just say, wake up. Like this polarization, when you realize that we have all, en masse, been hyper-polarized way beyond the actual levels in which we disagree. That's sort of the first step, is to have everybody in the world at once see the ways in which artificial polarization has taken place. then it's really hard. So one of the things, for example, about conspiracy thinking or polarization is once you start going that way, it's actually non-linearly harder to pull people back. There was an example, Kyrie Irving, the famous basketball player, said that he believed that the earth was flat because he fell into a YouTube rabbit hole. When he was later, because he's looked up to by a lot of kids, and he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to mislead people," students in a classroom that NPR interviewed said that the students believed that now the round earthers had gotten to him, which shows you that once he said that the earth is flat, they believed that too, and then they thought now, oh, the round earthers are telling him that we shouldn't believe that. So it gets really dangerous really quickly. And so the skills of cult deprogramming and depolarization and conflict mediation and healing, which I think is the stuff that you're really interested in now, is those skills have been never important than ever. And we have to figure out how do you design technology to make it as easy to find common ground as it is to find knowledge on Wikipedia. And that's like a whole new design project that we need like 1,000 people racing to the top to figure out how do we do that.
Let me make you feel a little bit better. There are 4 students here, and by the way, for me, it's more than just healing, it's genuine reconciliation, because healing doesn't have to be permanent. Reconciliation is actually changing the culture. We got 4 students here from NYU Abu Dhabi from 4 different countries. Can you guys stand? I just want to point them out to you, because these 4 students represent the best of the best of the best. And they aren't trapped, they aren't biased, they don't see the same kind of ugliness that we see in social media and that we see in technology. And I'm going to ask one of them from Colombia, if you can, what can we learn from what is happening at the most international institution on the face of the earth? What is happening at NYU Abu Dhabi that is so different that you are not afflicted by this kind of negativity and this kind of hostility?
One of the things that I value most about NYU Abu Dhabi is that, and something that only happens in NYU Abu Dhabi, Indians and Pakistanis get along together, the Chinese and the Vietnam get along together. Virtually every country and every nation on earth gets along together in peace and harmony, and not all the other roommates, they're best friends. And that's what I most value, Frank.
It's a nice alternative to the ugliness here. Is there anything that we can do on college campuses in America?
Well, there's I think a practical, tactical point back to the bubbleification that I think can help, and it can apply in these other contexts too, is, let me use this as an example. In one of the earlier stages of Google's conflict in China, part of what really precipitated that conflict and then later its exit initially was when search results in China were being censored on every page. So let's say in those days you did a search for Tiananmen Square and what you got were results that said tourism in Tiananmen Square, which is presumably not the complete picture. On every single page of every single result, there was a notice to people at the bottom which said, these results are incomplete in accordance with local laws. It's basically saying you are not getting a complete picture here. And I think just a very tactical point on this bubble problem that we have is, part of the challenge is people are in a bubble but don't know it. People are in a bubble and think that the results that they're seeing or the voices that they're hearing are representative when they are not. And I think that on a very tactical level, if there was a greater visibility into this isn't the complete picture, that alone would be a small step in the right direction. And as it translates to university settings and the like, it would, I think, for some people, have them seek out what is the complete picture. And that's certainly, I think, what was going on in China at that time.
I had one question. As some of you may know, Venezuela is now on what seems like the brink of a civil war. And as soon as this broke out, the government just shut down social media. And this is not the first time it happens. It's the second or third or fourth time it happens. How do you believe the international community should face this problem?
Of shutting down social media? Well, there have been many times where the internet or social media have been shut down. In Egypt during the Tahrir Revolution, in Yemen, most recently, of course, in Sri Lanka, and certainly in Venezuela. And there are different reasons for all of these to happen. Sometimes it was government imposed, sometimes it was self-imposed by companies in these markets. I do believe that social media is a massive amplifier of very heated things, heated moments, heated opinions, and when the heat is so high that people will kill each other in the streets, there may be some wisdom to just turn down the amplifier a little bit. Shutting it down and controlling it is a different story. But there is sometimes some subtle wisdom in at least ensuring that this doesn't turn into a very ugly situation. But of course, if governments use it to shut people up, which often is the case, then we have lost a very important lever of really democracy and advancement of society. So I can see your point on both sides.
So a question for any of you, including Frank. Thank you for doing this, Frank. I've never thought of this from this perspective. I've always thought of this as really being a data issue and not a civility issue. And I don't want to summarize 45 minutes of content into 3 bullet points, but it sounds like you guys are saying the potential solutions are to educate the users of the platform as to the fact that this is not really the entire world. B, maybe encourage the operators of the platform to provide some incentives for civility. What about 3? What about legislating? There are restrictions on hate speech, and I'm not suggesting that it's a good idea, but have people considered the implications of legislation on a massive scale? As a means to solve this issue?
It's essential. It's essential. If we don't have legislation or enforcement mechanisms, it will not work. There is no incentive to stop this behavior or these platforms from doing what they do. So it has to come down eventually to some laws, regulations, enforcements. We have 2 challenges to get there. The first is many of these services will not be in the jurisdictions where the laws will be made. So that's the first problem. I'll move my server to Sierra Leone. Let Congress make all the laws they want. How will they get to them? That's the first challenge. The second challenge is the way we make policies and rules and regulations today is at the speed of molasses. By the time we get together to come up with a new rule, the technology has made 6 steps forward. So you have a velocity and complexity issue that is misaligned with how we make policy. So we need to solve for that. We need to decouple these 2 so we can get there. But that's a big discussion, but I think your points are well taken.
I mean, I think the point that you're also making is that this is just the beginning right now. I mean, so technology is getting faster and faster and faster and faster, and this happened, all of the consequences for democracy, polarization, kids' mental health are happening just with today's tech. And it's only getting faster, and we don't have an accountability system. E.O. Wilson is a hero of mine, said we have Paleolithic emotions. The problem of humanity is we have these ancient Paleolithic emotions, we have medieval institutions from the 18th century, and we have godlike tech. That's the problem statement. So, we got your chimpanzee with a nuke or with Facebook, and you can launch nuclear wars, or you can launch information wars, and we have medieval institutions that have no idea how to catch up with this. And there are a bunch of policies that, I think we need to think about. I mean, given the fact that this is only going to get more intense, we need a way of making the government faster at evaluating these things, just faster OODA loops. So if the government has something like an Office of Technology Assessment again, simply just nonpartisan, do all that research, quickly evaluate technologies, identify policies, do the convening. We need more of that. There's also a bunch of stuff on content around making companies responsible. Right now, companies are not responsible for any of the content that's on there because of the Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. That was part of what made the internet free. So you upload something to YouTube. YouTube's not responsible if something's on there that they can't detect because otherwise the business won't work. But YouTube, that's because they're claiming they're a platform. But when they're recommending something 15 billion times, that makes them bigger than the New York Times times 10. So, or the church, yeah, exactly. So we have to come up with that. The other thing we need is fiduciary law. So I think about it this way. Right now, you walk into Facebook, it's like you're walking into a priest in a confession booth, but whose entire business model is to sell everything they heard to someone else. But it's worse than that because they listen to 2 billion people's confessions and they have a supercomputer next to them to calculate confessions that you're going to make before you walk in based on just the way that it looks like you're walking. So I know what's going to come out of your mouth, and then I'm going to sell it to someone else. So it's not that we don't want priests in confession booths, although maybe you don't want that. But what you do want is not priests with business models to sell it to someone else.
By the way, your answer is so good that even the cameraman laughed. We got time for 2 more, so you got to do it very, very quick, and you're going to do it very quick.
Role of cable TV in all of this. You know, if you look at it, one side gets presented on, you know, MSNBC, CNN, another side gets represented on Fox. It's how do you deal with the role of those companies in perpetuating this misunderstanding?
One of you, and quickly.
I'll just say briefly, back to what we were talking about with thought bubbles and this bubblification of people. I think part of the challenge of what we see is when you have something that is portrayed explicitly as fair and balanced, when objectively it is not, that's the problem. It's not an issue. It's not an issue if I read The Economist and I understand that the editorial bias of that publication is we are for free markets and libertarian approach and so forth, but it's when that is not disclosed, or worse still, is disclosed in a very misleading and deceitful way, that's where I think we have the challenge that we get.
Go ahead.
So, in my opinion, the model on the internet, in particular on social platforms, is weighted toward who can provide the most accurate, relevant content to users. If you look at YouTube, it's providing recommendations to watch Alex Jones conspiracy theory videos because it thinks that that user is going to find that provocative and entertaining. So if a company like YouTube decides that it doesn't want to encourage this sort of negative discourse and negative behavior, all of a sudden it might not actually be providing the most relevant, accurate content to its users, which opens the door for another platform to basically go and provide more accurate content, which users are going to flock to because the platform understands them. How do you combat something like that?
I would just replace the word accuracy because there's nothing about what YouTube is doing now that's about optimizing for accuracy. A funny thing that's true, when the Mueller Report came out, you know what the #1 most recommended channel was? Russia Today. Russia Today's coverage of the Mueller Report was the most recommended video when the Mueller Report came out. Because Russia, and we have an ex-YouTube whistleblower who works with us who's done all the research, and Russia Today has gamed all the recommendation systems so they get a lot of the views for a lot of the big popular topics. And so the Mueller Report, you can look it up, it just was on BuzzFeed yesterday.
Fadi, I want to give both you guys the last word. What would you?
I just want us to all think about this. There is a war out there to control the digital space right now and to control our discourse and participation in the digital space. And that war has 2 views. And whilst we focused this afternoon's discussion on the view in the liberal world, there is a different view in China and in the rest of the world. So I urge us, because we didn't bring it up, to keep in mind that we have an actual division right now in the world between 2 very different views on the value of the public discourse. One led by us and our companies, largely, and one led by China and the companies it controls. So keep that in mind as we decide how to get our companies under control. Let's keep in mind also what's happening in the rest of the world.
Gabriel.
I want to make one last plug for education. After the election, Sam B. Frank, she's a woman who has a very progressive show on cable television. She's a Democrat. You may not have heard of her, but nevertheless. Sam B. Did this amazing piece on fake news. And what she covered, for those of you who haven't seen it, look it up. You might find it on YouTube, I don't know. What she revealed is that we were not the first country in the world to deal with this, that Finland itself had dealt with this very same problem. And what did it do? It found the most innovative minds in the United States education and academia to teach them and come up with a curriculum for the country of how to understand and combat fake news. They used our resources and our expertise to educate their citizenry of how to overcome this. I believe that many of these resources we already have, As I said, we work with the Knight Foundation. They've been working on civil discourse for a long time. We have other NGOs like Tristan's that are emerging right now that are being extremely thoughtful. These resources do exist, and it's about mobilizing them, integrating into our society in a very, very young and early level, and I think we can move forward.
So I'll end with 2 statistics for you. And they're tough. 81% of Americans believe that this is the most divided that we have been in their lifetime. 81%. And 79% of Americans have stopped talking to someone or had someone stop talking to them because they simply disagree with their politics. And that is being driven by this collapse of technology, populism, and loss of civility and civics. I can't think of a more important panel for this organization to deal with, and I am scared to hell of the impact if we don't. Tomorrow at 8:30, in one of these rooms, there'll be a discussion of language that will seek to unify the words and phrases that can be used by the left and the right, that instead of dividing people, you can still communicate principle without driving people apart. The 3 of you are brilliant. The 3 of you offer incredible solutions. The 3 of you sometimes disagreed, but you always did so with civility. And I'm proud that the Milken Global Conference would bring the 3 of you together. Everyone, thank you very much.